to the Oklahoma Territorial Museum. My name is Nathan Turner. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the director here at the museum. We're very happy to have you for this forum. When Tracy approached me to host it, my first thought was, well, okay, we can do that. We're a community facility, and we'd love to be able to provide this space for you to learn in this arena. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Tracy.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Tracy from the Guthrie Chamber of Commerce, and we are honored. Our legislation committee is honored to host this event. We have several events going on. We want to educate everyone on all the elections that are coming up. We had one Monday night. There's several next week, so make sure you go to GuthrieChamber.com to find out all of our events. And when we were talking about where to host this event, I thought this is a historic vote for Oklahoma. So this is an ideal location for us to be here. And anytime I can get people in this building, I'm thrilled, because most people either one, have never been here in their life, or they've already come when they were in 3rd grade. So history hasn't changed, but the displays have changed throughout the years. There's a wonderful flag over here that was presented to the state of Oklahoma on July 4th. It was actually flown on, I just blanked the name of it, Nathan. In Philadelphia at the Independence, there we go, Independence Hall, and it was given to Oklahoma on right after that. So there's a lot of history in this building. So perfect place for us to be. I'm going to turn it over. We flipped a coin earlier. So Adria from the State Chamber is going to start, and then Bud. And tell me again, I always mess up where you're from.
I'm the Executive Director of New Health Solutions Oklahoma.
New Health Solutions Oklahoma is going to go after that. We have cards for questions. We're not opening it up to the audience with the live mic. So if you have questions, please come to the back, and you can submit those questions. And Chris Evans from the Guthrie News page is going to be our moderator. So we're going to turn it over to you, Adria.
Are you going up there?
I am.
Can you give this to the gentleman in the blue right back there?
I will.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm Adria Berry. I work at the State Chamber of Oklahoma. We are a business organization. We have about 1,500 members across the state, and all of those members are businesses. 75% of our members are small businesses. So we represent employers, business owners from across the state. So I'm here speaking on behalf of them and a policy that was set by our executive committee to oppose State Question 788. So I have a quick question for the audience before I really get started. How many of you, raise your hand if you have read the text of State Question 788, word for word? Yes, the text. Good. Well, that's important, and it's an important question for me to start with, because that's what I'm here to talk about tonight. I'm here to talk about State Question 788. I'm not actually here to talk about medical marijuana. I am not the expert on the pros and the cons of medical marijuana and its use for medicinal purposes. So what I'd like to talk about, though, is a state question that was put forth by a group called Oklahomans for Health. It was an initiative petition. They gathered signatures. They gathered enough signatures to have it put on the ballot. So on June 26th, you in this room and Oklahomans across the state will vote for State Question 788. It's a yes or no vote. So if you vote yes, you will be voting to legalize State Question 788, and it will become a statutory law. If you vote no, it will not become law. So I want to go through a little bit of our points and give you some background on how we came to our conclusion to oppose this state question. I did have a presentation, but it didn't work out with my laptop, so I'm going to do my best, and forgive me if I'm a little awkward. That's just normal. So, all right, so I told you a little bit about the history, but next I want to tell you about the problems that we see with this state question. The language is overly broad. The language of the state question itself is so broad that it has caused employers to be concerned for the safety of not only their businesses, but of their employees. Also, if they have the public customers coming inside of their businesses, they're concerned. And I'll get a little bit more into the details of that later, but I want to talk about the broad picture of the problems that we see. So overly broad language, safety concerns, lack of a regulatory framework, there is a lack of certainty, lack of quality control parameters, and an unrealistic timeline for implementation. And finally, there's an increased liability for businesses and likelihood of lawsuits. So first, I want to get into the problems we see with the regulatory part of this. As written, State Question 788 would put the Oklahoma State Department of Health in charge of regulating this new industry. Raise your hand if you've read any articles in the newspaper about the Oklahoma State Department of Health this year. If you have, you know what I'm referring to. They've had basically a fiscal crisis this year. They had missing money, they had to lay off numerous people, they've had changes in leadership. It's basically a state agency in peril. They're unstable, they're going through a lot of changes, and I know that when the state question was written, they didn't know that that was going to happen. So I'm not saying that they knew that, but in the current state of affairs, the way things look today, the Oklahoma State Department of Health is one of the last agencies I would put in charge of a brand new, large, budding industry. An unrealistic timeline further complicates the regulatory framework of this. The Department of Health, as I said, they are a troubled agency. They would be required to begin implementation within 30 days of passage, so 30 days after June 26th. When we think about medical marijuana, we don't know a lot about it, and that's because it's illegal federally, so there hasn't been a lot of research done. We do know that there need to be some quality control parameters if it is legalized. For instance, you need to know what dosage you're getting, just like when you go to the store and buy an over-the-counter drug or are prescribed a medication. You also would want to know exactly what strain you're getting. None of those things are lined out in this state question. I want to go ahead and just jump into the employer concerns, because that's the meat of where the state chamber stands. We, as I said, represent businesses from across the state. And what brought this to our attention was our executive committee. They had a meeting in April, and they started discussing the text of State Question 788. And they realized that as a collective room of business owners or leaders in the business community, that there were going to be some major changes to how they were able to drug test their employees and how they were able to determine whether to hire someone or fire them or discipline them. So they decided to oppose State Question 788. As it reads, State Question 788 allows medical marijuana license holders, because prescriptions aren't, we call them a license holder as far as the state question goes, because prescriptions would be for something that is federally FDA approved or legal. So medical marijuana license holders are given more protection than other workers. And workers are prohibited from using or possessing marijuana at work or during work hours, so that's a good thing. However, they're not prohibited from using it right before work and coming to work intoxicated or high or impaired. So that would create safety concerns for employees, customers, and the public. Further, whenever you get two lawyers in a room who disagree about one statute, there are sure to be lawsuits. That's just the way things work. We both can read the same language and disagree about what it means. And of course, we've heard from other lawyers from big law firms across the state, McAfee and Taft and Crow and Dunleavy, who disagree about the exact implication on employers. What is foreseeable is lawsuits. Anytime there is a lawsuit against a business, that drives up the cost of doing business in Oklahoma. I did have the actual text of the State Question 788, Section 6B, for the people who are curious about what I was referencing about more protections for medical marijuana license holders. So if you're interested in looking that up, please do. And I was hoping to have it on the screen to talk to you guys about it, because I've received a lot of feedback, and I'll call it feedback, even though some of it's very creative in their wording. That is to say, I have a lot of people that don't enjoy what I'm saying, if you can guess. So Oklahoma is a right-to-work state. Absolutely, I admit it, that we are a right-to-work state. That means employers can fire someone or hire them at will, right? However, the actual text of State Question 788 provides a further protection. It's in black and white, it's in the text. So people who argue with me about that, it just comes back to, I interpret it as a further protection for medical marijuana license holders, where another lawyer might say, no, it's not that big of a deal, we'll work it out. And as I said, we have business members across the state, 75% of which are small businesses. Small businesses don't have HR departments, and they don't have big legal departments to figure out the personnel issues that are sure to ensue after State Question 788. In conclusion, I would just like to go over a few last points about this. The main point is that we need certainty and clarity if we are going to legalize marijuana for medical purposes or for recreational. State Question 788 does not provide the certainty and clarity that we need. Oklahoma workers deserve to know that they are safe. When I picture an Oklahoma worker, and who I'm talking about right now, would be a factory worker or someone who works in a big manufacturing facility. We have members like that, and I went and visited one of our big manufacturers down in southwest Oklahoma recently, and the machinery they use is huge. It is intimidating at best. To think of someone who is using any kind of substance, not just marijuana, but opiates or alcohol, and using that equipment is scary. It should be scary to the worker standing next to the person using it, and it's scary to the employers. If it passes, we definitely have a lot of work to do to get this statute into workable form. And my question about that, because I hear a lot of that, people saying, oh, you know, it's just a state question, we can change it, it's fine, that's just how this works. My question to you is, do you truly trust the legislature that has been in 2 special sessions in the last year? We had a teacher walkout, we've had budget crises. Do you trust that legislature to fix everything that needs to be fixed with this state question? And with that, I will turn it over to my friend Bud.
Thank you, Adria. First, thank you guys for coming out tonight. I know it's probably been a long day for all of you, like it has myself, and it takes some dedication to come out and learn about this really important issue. Thank you to the Guthrie Chamber for putting on this event, for inviting us. My name is Bud Scott. I'm the attorney and executive director for New Health Solutions Oklahoma, which is effectively the Chamber of Commerce for the cannabis industry in Oklahoma. I've represented cannabis clients in several states, most notably in Colorado for the last 6 years. So very experienced in working with emerging markets and working with the industry itself, the development of regulations that surround the subject, and the appropriateness of what we need to do moving forward here in Oklahoma. One of the things I want to point out that Adria, who I love and I respect, and I also agree with some of the things that she says, and understand the concerns that are expressed by some of her members. However, I think those are far outweighed by the benefits that would be provided by State Question 788. And if we don't trust our legislature to come in and fix this thing, do we think they're going to do this on their own? Do we think that the same organizations that are opposing this right now are going to come out and support another initiative that may take 4, 5 to 10 years before we address this issue and provide medical relief to the hundreds of thousands of people across Oklahoma that desperately need it? Is that what we think they're actually going to do? I have zero faith in that. We have thousands of people across the state of Oklahoma that took time and energy to collect signatures and develop this petition initiative, which I will firmly admit is not perfect. It's far from perfect. But our organization recognized that this was the best opportunity we have to develop a medical marijuana program in Oklahoma and achieve both the health benefits that are certainly certain to come from this, as well as the economic benefits. So one of the issues that I'd like to point out here, we talk about people operating heavy machinery. The University of Iowa just last week released a study funded by the National Safety Transportation Board, also funded by the National Center for Drug Abuse, which demonstrated that being under the influence of marijuana impairs you no less than driving under the legal influence of alcohol. So this mythos that somehow using marijuana makes you completely unstable and incapable of driving is not supported by the facts. It's just completely not supported by the facts. I know many of you probably received the Daily Oklahoman, and you've witnessed what I would just call outright electioneering communication. This has been a campaign run by our state's largest newspaper with no objectivity, no responsible reporting of the facts, consistent misuse of data. And it's something that needs to be called out because it's not right, especially when so much is on the line here in Oklahoma. State Question 788, like I said, it's not perfect, but it's the best step we have. It's the best opportunity we have. I can see people here in the audience that are desperate for this relief. If anyone is uncertain about the medical benefits of medical marijuana, I'll direct you to Google and do one search. Look up medical scientific studies that demonstrate the efficacy of medical marijuana. You will find hundreds of peer-reviewed studies that demonstrate its effectiveness in treating everything from chronic pain to cancer to epilepsy. And the jury's not out on this, the jury is in. Medical marijuana is effective in treating medical conditions. There are 2 applications right now before the FDA, and the FDA is about to issue new patents and licenses specifically for CBD, one of the components of medical marijuana. Once they issue this, they've already issued patents and licenses for synthetic THC. At that point, there can be no claim that medical marijuana is a Schedule I narcotic. Because a Schedule I narcotic, all that means is that this is a product with no medical value. You've got the FDA showing that there is medical value from this plant. So those 2 things do not align, period. You also have our president, President Trump, who's recognizing that he's going to support bipartisan legislation in Congress that will make this a states' rights issue. It's called the States' Rights Act. It's being sponsored by Senator Gardner, Republican from Colorado, and the Democrat is just, I'm drawing a blank right now, I apologize. So we've got a States' Rights Act, which will effectively exempt medical marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act in states where they've legalized medical marijuana. This is a huge step. What I urge people to consider here in Oklahoma is beyond some of the concerns about employment, which are valid. They are valid. But let's think about us missing the boat once again in Oklahoma. We rank at or near the bottom in nearly every indicator, economically, health, quality of life, education. Isn't it time for us to take advantage of something and not be last to or the bottom of the barrel here? That's what we're pushing for. I can show you studies that our organizations at the national level have conducted that show the marijuana industry right now is producing $70 billion a year in the American economy. Legal. That's job creation, that's investment opportunities, that does not include dollars that go to cities and that go to counties at the local level. This is a tremendous economic opportunity that we're just incredibly short-sighted to turn on based upon basically esoteric concerns and paranoia. We've recently seen commercials issued by the No campaign featuring our illustrious Senator Langford, who cites that effectively if we legalize medical marijuana, the moral fabric of our society is going to erode. There are 30 states in the District of Columbia in the United States that have legalized medical marijuana. Every single one of those states far outpaces Oklahoma in every one of those categories that I said to you. We trail behind every one of those. So somehow, those societies are still doing very well. They're prospering. They're reaping the benefits of the economic side of this, as well as providing that medical relief to their patients. Yet, for some reason, we're going to decide that, no, it's not for us. To me, that is foolhardy. It is also contradictory to the mission of what we see with organizations like the Chamber of Commerce. It's contradictory to the mission where we say Oklahoma is open for business, because it should be. And this is a multi-billion-dollar business for Oklahoma. The members of my organization, our trade association, we have 50 members. It's not quite as many as the State Chamber of Commerce, but these are all Oklahoma businesses, every single one of them. Existing businesses ranging from $350 million companies to mom and pop restaurant operations. We have that all across the board, and these are people that recognize the benefits here. One thing I want to clear up, the campaign against 788 says 788 is not medical. That is an outright fabrication. Do you understand what makes the difference between a medical program and a recreational program? One thing, the presence of a recommendation from a physician. That is the only difference. In a recreational state, anyone who is 18 or 21 can go in and buy that product. In a medical state, they have to have the recommendation of a physician. And what does State Question 788 include? A requirement that a medical physician make that recommendation for a patient to get a medical license. That's it. It is medical. Now, granted, I'll agree with Adria and some of the opponents that 788 is not as spelled out as it should be. But we're talking about a state question here, ladies and gentlemen. You're talking about the development of an entire industry that's going to require hundreds of pages of regulation. Every state that has done this thus far is pretty similar to what we're seeing with 788. It's a small skeletal outline that you're asking the people of Oklahoma, do you believe that Oklahomans should have access to medical marijuana? Do you believe that we should have the right to apply for a license, to grow, to process, to transport, test, to research medical marijuana? I firmly believe that answer should be yes, firmly. And I hope that everyone else agrees with that as well. There's so many issues that our organization stands ready to work with the business community, beyond our business community. We're members of the chamber. Many of my members are members of the local chambers. So we already stand ready and willing to work with everyone. We're working with the medical community on conducting research. Let's make Oklahoma an innovator when it comes to medical research. Again, let's lead the country in something instead of trailing from behind. This is an excellent opportunity. Let's not shoot it down because we have some haphazard fears about not being able to modify legislation after the fact. This is a statutory state question, not a constitutional amendment. We're working already with legislative leaders in the House and Senate. We're communicating with the Director of the Department of Health on trying to develop responsible, timely regulations and laws to make sure this is done in an appropriate measure to provide relief to the hundreds of thousands of Oklahomans that need it. So thank you.
Okay, again, we got index cards on the back. If anybody in the audience has a question, be sure to fill that out and we'll get it answered. Hopefully we can get to everybody here tonight. We do have some questions that citizens brought in online, so you kind of touched on both of them already, but they took their time to feed us a question, so we'll get their questions answered here. Sure. First question, and we'll give Adria the first 2 minutes, and then after that, 2 minutes to respond.
If we need it.
If needed, correct, if needed. We got a lot of questions. States like Colorado have seen growth in their economy since legalizing marijuana, but it came at a cost. Colorado businesses are having a hard time finding qualified employees now who can pass a drug test. Is that something that could happen in Oklahoma?
The short answer is yes. And that is one of the concerns of the employment community and the business community, that it will come at a cost, like we've seen in Colorado. So yes.
So I'll say yes, it could come at that cost. But there's so many businesses right now in every one of those 30 states, and the states that actually have successfully implemented programs, they're adjusting to this. They're recognizing that there's quality professionals, there are quality employees that might use medical marijuana and still be capable of providing a high level of service. I'll tell you myself, I was recruited to be in-house counsel for one of the largest extract companies in the United States out of Colorado. And the offer they gave me, cash-wise, was lower than I make here in Oklahoma. Why? Because there's so much competition for that job. There's so many people willing to do it that, hey, they don't mind. They're willing to take it. They'll pay them a lower wage because there's so much competition. And most companies are adjusting to this. They're changing their HR guidelines to recognize that medical marijuana is not this thing that is so prohibitive. It's something that people, professionals, not just people on the ground, we're talking about executives, we're talking about doctors, we're talking about people from all walks of life. The same people that currently use opioids, right? They can do their jobs okay on opioids. So medical marijuana is somehow going to be tremendously different for them? I don't think so.
Thank you. Our next question. The amount of marijuana that a license holder can possess under State Question 788 seems to be overkill. Why give a patient access to so much marijuana? We'll let you go first.
So again, my organization didn't write this state question, but we understand the intent of those that did. And the reason for providing for the amounts that are allowed in 788 is because those are the amounts that are required to actually make your own medicine. That's commonly referred to here. Charlotte's Web is a product in Denver or out of Colorado that's effective in treating very specific conditions. And that is the amount that is required for those patients to make their own. It's not about people smoking joints. This isn't about Cheech and Chong. This is about real people suffering from medical conditions. And this is one of the products that's providing the only form of relief that they're finding effective. So effectively, that amount, people are worried about it. Honestly, people who want to get cannabis right now legally, they can get it. They're going to have it. They can get it in that amount too. This allows for those patients to have access to it so they can make their own medicine and be successful at it and be successful in treating their conditions. So our goal ultimately is to provide access to these customers, to these patients, make sure they have this product, and we want to do it in a safe manner. And this gives me an opportunity to kind of jump back real quick on one of the things Adria was pointing out, quality controls. That's a very important issue for us. It's an important issue for the industry. We've proposed nearly 400 pages of legislation and regulations that we've provided to legislative leadership, to the Department of Health, that outline, based on best practices from other states, how you do quality control, how you do packaging and handling and labeling. We want to keep this stuff out of the hands of children, keep this stuff away from people who don't need to use it, just like any other form of medicine.
The amount that a patient is allowed to possess on their person, at home, plants, edibles, it's an extreme amount. At the last debate I was at with Bud, we also had another speaker there who said that, who was part of the original writing, and she said that it was written to cover 1 month's medication for a cancer patient. So while I understand where they were coming from when they wrote it, 1 month for a cancer patient is, they may need that. But someone who suffers from other disorders, or ailments or diseases, the way that it is written is just an extreme amount, and it causes a lot of concerns.
And in response to that, hey, for representing the industry, of course we'd prefer to be able to sell all that product and not have folks making it on their own. So we understand that perspective, but we want to ensure that patients have those rights.
Okay, our next question, a little lengthy, but hear me out. When you took the oath of office, you promised to support and defend the Constitution of both the United States and Oklahoma. In the Constitution, the necessary and proper clause demands that you pass any laws which are necessary and proper for the benefit of the United States, Oklahoma, and her people. I have lupus, and like so many people with lupus, cancer, glaucoma, seizures, or fibromyalgia, hope I said that right, close.
Fibromyalgia.
Thank you. I didn't look over the question close enough. Find the use of medical marijuana to be life, sustainably beneficial. I would have to starve to death with my lupus and it had not been for medical marijuana. Can you tell me how the passage of Proposition 78 is not necessary or proper for the betterment of the United States or the great state of Oklahoma?
Me?
Well, I haven't taken any oaths. I'm actually a private citizen who works for a private organization, but
we did take the bar.
Oh, that's true. Yes. Okay. So I am a member of the State Bar Association, but for anyone with those ailments, my heart goes out. It's not. I'm not heartless. I work for the business community. I work for corporations, but I'm not heartless. We're in a position, though, of representing business interests. It's what we do. So I hope if this doesn't pass, that a better statute or a question comes along that is written better. I could say that with some of the language in State Question 788, if it weren't there, we might not even be opposed. We might not be here right now. So I do hope that you can find the relief that you need.
Yeah, and on that issue, Adria's genuine about this, and this is something that we've attempted to work on this issue during the legislative session to address some of these concerns on employment. This is something that from the industry side, we're very committed to working with all stakeholder groups, whether it's medicine, whether it's business, legal, law enforcement. There's several things that we'll need to address as we implement these programs, and that's just the most responsible way of looking at this. Unfortunately, the approach by some is just to hide our head in the sand and act like this isn't going to happen and that this isn't a trend that's already going across the nation. This is an opportunity for us to really jump ahead of it and be proactive with our legislation. And I encourage our legislators to take that step. We've already been pushing for the call to go into a special session briefly just to pass some enabling legislation that would help implement this while we work with the health department on actually doing regulatory implementation. So that's something we're encouraging our folks to do at the legislature. And we definitely encourage every one of you out there in the audience, watching online, to encourage your elected officials to hold their feet to the fire on this. Because we've seen this in other states where the citizens have voted in favor of medical marijuana legalization, and then the legislature thinks that they're above the will of the people, and they decide not to implement a program for several years. That's a problem. It's a problem we do not want to repeat here in Oklahoma, because there's, like I said, hundreds of thousands of Oklahomans in need of relief, and we have a very unique market opportunity here in Oklahoma. And I approach this kind of from obviously from the business perspective. Arkansas, which passed their legalization in 2016, they tried to implement a program that was ultimately thrown out by the courts because they tried to create a monopoly that only allowed for 5 cultivators in the entire state. Well, because of that, we now have the opportunity to potentially enter the market before every single one of our neighbors, except for Colorado and New Mexico that just touched the tip of the panhandle. That's a tremendous market advantage for us. I'm running out of time. Thank you.
Okay, but I think you can go first on this question.
Okay.
Would a member of law enforcement be eligible for a medical marijuana license, and how would it affect their job when they're searching for illegal drugs?
For a medical marijuana patient license?
Eligible for a medical marijuana license. Would a member of law enforcement be eligible for a medical marijuana license?
You know, that's a good question, and I think just like any other citizen, they would be eligible for a medical marijuana patient license, not a business license, though. There's a clear prohibition in almost every state that you cannot have entanglements between active law enforcement. Same thing with any physicians that are recommending or prescribing cannabis-related products, that there cannot be any entanglements there. So, but as a law enforcement officer, why not? Aren't they allowed to use opioids? Aren't they allowed to use every other form of medicine? Why should they not be allowed to use cannabis products? Again, this is the mythology on this issue that's just really not true. We could point out, I'm going to jump on the opioid issue real quick while I've got it on my brain. We've had numerous reports come out. One just this last week that was published by Scientific American. This is published by the RAND Corporation in conjunction with the National Institute of Drug Abuse Prevention. So these are legitimate studies funded by the government, the federal government that classifies marijuana as a Schedule I narcotic, which demonstrated that in states with implemented programs that have actual dispensaries, there is a 25% reduction in opioid prescriptions. A second study showed a 28% reduction in opioid overdoses. So this scourge that we're witnessing, this is just one arrow that we can pull out of our quiver to attack this issue. Why would we not utilize it?
So the question was about law enforcement getting a medical marijuana license, correct? Okay. I don't know why they wouldn't be able to. I mean, there's nothing in the language of State Question 788 that would prohibit any person that is given a physician's order to they're able to get a medical marijuana license. So I'm not quite sure of what was the second part of the question?
How would it affect them doing their job when they're searching for illegal narcotics in a vehicle when they make a traffic stop?
I think it's just, I mean, it sounds like it's just the same as what I'm saying. I mean, there would have to be some policies in place and procedures in place for law enforcement to not use marijuana before they start their shift, which is what we're worried about from an employment standpoint. I don't know much more about it.
And just in response to that, State Question 788, what it specifies is that you cannot utilize medical marijuana while on the job.
Yep. So
while you're on your job site, you cannot use a vape pen, you cannot smoke a product, you cannot take a pill. Now it'd be interesting to see that applied across the board because it's not currently applied. You can go into these same jobs and use any other form of medicine. So once again, it's not the same treatment. However, we want to make sure that people, obviously you don't want to be driving on anything, whether it's Percocet or whether it's Flexeril. We don't want to encourage people we don't want to encourage children to use these products. There's been a lot of scare tactics out here in the media. And again, I'm going to go off topic for just a second, but there's a group called Oklahomans Against 788. And these guys, you can't believe a word they're saying because they put out flyers that have hazmat suits and gas masks saying that people are going to have to wear these because cannabis is in the community. I've worked in these greenhouses. Before I was an attorney, I worked in the Netherlands as a professional grower. I have a botany degree from OU and a Class 6 degree. I've done this. I don't have asthma. I don't have cancer because of it. I represent clients in Colorado right now. I visit their facilities every other month to do regulatory compliance. This just is such phony scare tactics. I wish we could have an honest debate about this issue, because it is a serious issue. It's not about Cheech and Chong. It's not about getting high. 70% of the industry is not even in a smokable format now. Most people are using pills. Most people are using droppers, topical applications. We're moving away from that anyways.
Well, but I want to just, one thing you said there though, that
Sure.
I have to disagree with about employers can't prohibit use of other drugs on the job, and that they can though. I mean, if someone's injured on the job and they are given opioids, or even if they're injured outside of work and they're given opioids, an employer can prohibit them from working while they're using opioids or alcohol. I mean,
And doing a workers' compensation claim as well. So if they're tested and they test
well,
positive,
yeah, specifically for workers' comp, but
opioid-
even outside of workers' comp.
Sure, and that's something, again, might have spoke out of turn on that, but ultimately 788 says you can't use it on site. We're finding some really interesting advancements with technology right now as far as testing goes, and this is something, as we've seen more states go into legalization, folks in the law enforcement community might be familiar. There's now mouth swabs that you can utilize that can show if you've actually been smoking in particular within a certain period of time. Blood tests are still the most effective way to determine how long it's been since someone has actually ingested this product. But I think as we continue to evolve and technology evolves, it'll be an opportunity for us to really hone this down and figure out when they're using or when they're not using on the job.
Thank you. Next question. If approved, who will be able to be licensed to produce, process, etc., and how will one apply to become licensed?
Well, under State Question 788, it's an application process through the Department of Health. I believe it just requires a $2,500 application fee. There's a fairly simple list of guidelines as to who would qualify as a business applicant. Basically, you have to be over 25 years old, can't have a conviction of a felony within a certain amount of time, you can't currently be an inmate. So it's fairly open-ended as far as that. It's very permissive, we'll say that. And that was how the drafters of this intended it to be. Now, we believe from the industry side, honestly, that this is something we're going to have to spell out quite a bit further. I represent clients of the liquor industry here in Oklahoma. Anytime I go in to submit for a mixed beverage permit, so my restaurant can sell alcohol, we have to go through background checks. We have to submit financial disclosure information. We have to demonstrate that we have X amount of capital on hand to make sure our business is capable of being run. And that's something we will be working to implement with the legislature and our policymakers.
Yep. And to add on to that, you know, one concern about anyone with $2,500 who can fit the criteria in State Question 788 can apply for this license to sell or
Process or distribute.
any of the things, right? So, you know, it causes concern. While we don't necessarily want to do a monopoly like Arkansas, I mean, that's probably problematic. Isn't there some level of expertise that's required in this for quality control purposes, for just basic, I mean, really, and you think about the state having to come in and look at every grower, inspect the growers. Mm-hmm. It's just, if anybody across the state can have this license, I think that's just a bit too much. So that is one of the problems that we have with it as well.
Yeah, and I think we'll echo those sentiments. So honestly, when you look at those inspection requirements, you look at the expertise that's required, these are things that in every state that you have a medical marijuana program in is spelled out in regulations. They define how those application processes work. They define what the qualifications and the standards are, and we will develop those here in Oklahoma as well after 788 passes. But that is something we're very committed to, is making sure that we have qualified personnel that are running these facilities and really doing this right.
Thank you. Next question, 2 parts. First one, who will get rich? Second part, what makes you believe that the Department of Health can implement this program, if passed, in 30 days? 400 plus pages of regulations.
Well, that's kind of a mixed bag of questions
Who will
there.
get rich?
No.
I'm joking.
So honestly, who will get rich? I think the trends in the cannabis industry right now, the early on, especially with the recreational states, that's where we see most of the revenue generated from. Medical states are quite a bit different as far as the revenue generation, so it's really inappropriate for us to always compare to, for example, Colorado when we do an economic impact analysis. because it's a different model. There's a much broader set of clients as opposed to a patient pool with a medical marijuana program. So people getting rich or not, I think there's an argument across the nation right now because we've had so much product saturation in states like Arizona, Oregon, Washington, California, and Colorado that so many people came into the market and started cultivating because there weren't restrictions on licensure and license issuance, that you had pricing drop so low that you've got people just going out of business, and now everyone's gobbling it up. Now that's how free market works, but we definitely encourage our system to be implemented in a more responsible manner that takes into considerations the ability to provide enough product for the clients or the patients here in Oklahoma, as well as ensuring that we have a stable market and return on investment. The second part of that question was like a three-part question. Oh, health department. So how will the health department do this? So what we'll tell you right now is that our industry is already proposing for additional fees on our services. That when we apply for a license under 788, it says $2,500. Every one of our proposals has had upwards of $15,000 per license application for a business, because it is our intent. We believe that we're responsible for funding the regulatory program, just like in the liquor industry. The ABLE Commission is funded almost exclusively by application fees, fines, et cetera. So we want to make sure that that's funded. There's a 7% tax that's called for in State Question 788. That would go towards 75% would go towards common education, 25% would go towards drug and alcohol abuse prevention programs. So the Oklahoma Tax Commission this week opined that effectively they believe that it'll be 7% plus our sales tax rate. So that's effectively going to be a 15% tax, which is the highest in the nation, by the way, for any medical marijuana program. So those funds at that point, some of our internal numbers that we've run, we have a couple of economists on our team, we've run the numbers on this, and we're projecting somewhere in the range of about $30 million of revenue each year, at least year one, year two, for the Oklahoma program. That would be basically directly to the General Revenue Fund, because we believe with application fees and everything else we're ready to pay, we're proposing license fees for everyone from a janitor to the CEO of those corporations have to actually pay in. And this is how it's done in other states.
How will the Oklahoma State Department of Health implement this program, and who will get rich? So the first part, who will get rich, truly, I'm not sure the intent of that question, but it's possible that we could have a new industry if it passes. It's true. However, if it is spread across the state with people everywhere growing and selling and distributing and processing, I'm not sure that anyone will get rich. The second part about the Department of Health, I addressed that earlier. It is a problem. It is a problem that we have with the state question. The Department of Health has had some major turnover this year. They've had scandals. They've had missing money in the millions of dollars. They've had to lay off people. And while I don't actually want to, I'm not intending to bash that agency because I know good people that work there and work really hard. It's questionable at best that they'll be able to truly implement this and do it quickly. So yes, a special session, as we've heard, might be necessary. So you mentioned ABLE, and we know when alcohol modernization first was passed, they gave themselves an 18-month window, I believe, to truly get the regulations in place. And I'm not saying that that's going to be what happens here, but I think if it does pass, we need more time. We absolutely need more time to get regulations in place, because as it is, there are so many unknowns. It's so broad. It truly just brings so many questions, and it just doesn't provide the clarification and safeguards that Oklahomans deserve.
And that timeline issue is something that we believe as well, that we need to have a little bit more time. I don't think we need 2 years. The only states that have taken that long legitimately to implement their programs were the first ones who did it. And the reason why was because they were the trailblazers. These were the ones taking the time to figure out how these rules would go into play, what was necessary to make sure that it was effective. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. We've seen what's worked in other jurisdictions. There's plenty of us that have recognized how this operates. I have full faith in Tom Bates, the Commissioner of Health. He's a former Assistant Attorney General. Very competent man. His staff is incredibly competent. There will be a dedicated division within the Department of Health that specifically works on the marijuana program. So other states who They also suffer these kind of scandals, which, by the way, after the audit was released of the health department, it was actually found that the money was there. It was just a shell game of how finances were reported. So I think it's quite a bit being overstated, the hyper-dramatization of the Department of Health. But I have full faith that we'll be able to work with these guys. Now, would it have been our choice to have gone through Department of Health? Honestly, no. I would have preferred to have gone through the Tax Commission because they have an enforcement division, they have an adjudicatory division, a ton of staff, but that's not what we have to operate with. What we have here is 788. And again, this is a statutory program. Statutes are amended every single year. We both do this for a living. This is something we work with legislators on. This is something we will have to continue doing. So it's not a constitutional amendment. We're just going to have to take a supermajority or another vote of the people to modify this. So let's be honest about this.
Being honest, but our legislature, come on.
Right, it is Oklahoma.
So
right.
While we do work with them every day, that both of us do, you never know what they're going to do. You just never know. You can hope for the best, and at the very end, things sour.
That's true.
So the unknowns there are a little bit, well, they are scary. It's scary to say, it's okay, just pass it, we'll fix it. We deserve better. I mean, we could do better.
Well, the Department of Health, there's a couple options here. If we don't go into special session, the health department can do what's called emergency rulemaking. And this is a legal process that's completely available. We've already provided our recommendations to the health department. Their internal team is already working on these emergency rules. So in case the legislature doesn't do this, they pass these rules. And those would then be in place until the legislative session would start in 2019, and at that point the legislature would have to approve new rules. We're hoping that the legislature will be more proactive than this, because we've given them the tools here. We've given them the recommendations. There's been plenty of time to study this. We've spent all year working on this issue. So they should be prepared to go in and address these concerns and these program guidelines. But will they? It's a different story. We've seen some really good indicators. Representative John Eccles, the majority floor leader in the House, has very clearly spoken out, and we're proud to have his leadership. He has very clearly said the House is committed to coming in for special session. The indicators coming out of the Senate is that they'll likely do it as well, but we'll have to see.
Yep.
All right, final question, unless we have any more that come in real quick before we have our closing statements. Last time this measure came up, there were lists of illness or medical conditions that could be prescribed. This one does not have any illnesses or medical conditions that can be described. I guess it would be up to the physician. Why is there no specific illnesses on this measure?
Well, first, this hasn't come up in Oklahoma. This will be the first time we voted on this as a state question, so that we'll just clear that up. The qualifying conditions issue, this is really important. And what we saw, again, I'll kind of harken back to the states that took several years to develop their regulations because they were the trailblazers. The initial states that adopted these programs, they had a limited list of qualifying conditions. And then over time, they started to see, oh, there's a bunch of research that's demonstrating this is effective in treating this. And they'd have to go back through the legislative process and amend it and add that condition to the list. That is incredibly cumbersome. So what we were just talking about, do we have the faith in the legislature to do that every single year? When we find out that this is an issue that is really left in the best hands of the physician and their patients, that we're gonna have to go back through the legislature and change this, keep adding these conditions to the list. It's incredibly cumbersome, and it's really pretty outdated. Ultimately, we believe that physicians are in the best position to make that determination with their individual patient on a case-by-case basis. You trust them, I trust them. When I go in and see my physician, I don't ask a legislator, I don't ask a politician, I don't ask a lawyer if I should be treated for something, what I should do about my bad back, what I should do about my heart condition. I ask my doctor, and I trust my doctor. And we ask that people give a little bit of credit to our medical community. Everyone out here saying that this is just going to be abused and we're going to turn into a pill mill situation. Well, first of all, where were all these people the last 15 to 20 years? Seriously, where were all these people? Where was all the outrage? Because we've had those pill mills. But that's a very small percentile of the physicians that are out there. There are very few bad actors. The rest of them are actually doing their job and doing it appropriately. 788 requires that those physicians make their recommendations in accordance with best practices and acceptable standards within the medical community. That's pretty straightforward.
And I think the person asking the question was probably thinking about Senator Yin's bill. He had a bill that went through the legislative session this last session that outlined some qualifying conditions. He is a doctor. Being a doctor, a lot of people felt comfortable with that. They would have probably felt a little more comfortable voting for 788 if his bill had passed, because it would have given some parameters and some guidelines to doctors. While I understand where Bud's coming from, and I do get what he's saying, giving some type of broad overview at least, I think would provide comfort to citizens who have seen the pill mills and have been outraged by the pill mills and don't want to see that happen in this industry.
Well, what do we require from pill mills? Do we require legislation that someone can only prescribe a piece of an opioid for a specific condition? No, that's not how the medical industry works. Most forms of pharmaceuticals, they're originally developed to treat kidney infections, and they find out that it's effective in treating hair growth. That's how these things enter the market. They find out they have a lot of different uses and applications, and we don't want to restrict this the same way or unnecessarily, so in the form of medical marijuana, than we would any other form of medicine. Now, Senator Yin, as you referred to, he's an anesthesiologist. He prescribes medicine, opioids that actually knock you out while you're getting surgery. I mean, I'll go out there and say I think he stands to lose some money if this bill passes. I have no problem saying that. This is a man who a couple of days ago said he actually does not support medical marijuana after saying for the last year that he's a big supporter of it. So I'm not sure how much we can trust his opinion on this issue. We're very concerned about the approach that he was trying to implement through Senate Bill 1120, because it was based on the New York model, which was so restrictive they don't have a program. It would have required a pharmacist to have owned one of these dispensaries, which they can't, by the way. It's a violation of their federal license to actually distribute pharmaceuticals, because it's Schedule I narcotic. So their program just does not exist. And Senate Bill 1120 was designed with those purposes in mind. It also included pricing controls. His proposal would have had the government setting prices for cannabis. That's pretty un-American to me.
But what would be the problem with some broad overview, regulations to say it can be prescribed for these certain type of illnesses, but make it broad, not as specific as Senator Yin's, but what would be the problem with that?
I think generally that's done, the FDA process with most pharmaceuticals is that you have a slip that goes in with that pill or with that form of medicine. And what it says what it's supposed to be recommended for or can be recommended for. But it does not restrict how that physician can recommend or prescribe it. So we do believe that there should be regulations in place that provide some form of follow-up. We're proposing that, first of all, 788 has a 2-year license requirement, so you go in and actually apply for your medical marijuana license as an individual, and you have it for 2 years. In the medical industry, generally, and I think most of you all know, if you get a script, it's sometimes good for 1 year, right? So we're more in line that this should be something that's more 1 year that you have that license, and we're encouraging that you be required to go back and have a 6 months checkup with that physician who was recommending that product. So there's some form of basically, they have to look over what's going on, the efficacy of the product. And we were already working with 28 physicians in Oklahoma to do a voluntary data submission program where these physicians that would be recommending cannabis to their clients or their patients, that after so much time, they'd have them come back in with a checkup. So if I go in, I see my physician, I'm going in there because I have Crohn's disease, and I come back 6 months later and I say, you know what, I was using this sativa product and I was using it in a vape format. It wasn't really working for me. So that physician can take notes on that, submit it blindly so you protect that patient's data, and have it publicly available so we demonstrate the efficacy or the inefficiency of that product. And then it allows us as an industry to start to take notes on that and say, okay, we can hone our products in a little bit more to treat very specific conditions. This is how the medical industry works. Now, it is something that we would go through both a voluntary process and also through a regulated process.
All right, that concludes our question portion of the evening. We're going to give you a chance to give your closing thoughts. And again, we appreciate you guys coming to Guthrie. I know you guys have been to a lot of these around the state. I'm not sure you had quite of a cool background like we have here in Guthrie or not.
It's just
That's
awesome.
pretty cool with the wagon. Yeah, pretty cool. But we'll at this time give you your final thoughts here as we conclude the night. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to go first because you've taken my turn a couple of times.
Sorry about that. Wasn't intentional.
So the State Chamber, I'm here on behalf of the business community. We are not cold-hearted. We are not ignoring the emotional or the medicinal arguments for medical marijuana. As a matter of fact, those are not the lane that we're in at all. There are so many problems with State Question 788. We believe that Oklahoma deserves better. We believe that if this is going to be a reality in Oklahoma, we need a better state question that provides protection for both businesses and employees. So thank you for having me. I've really appreciated being able to answer some of the questions on behalf of the business community. I appreciate being up here with Bud, so thank you.
Thank you, Adria. Thank you guys again for having us this evening. I'm always happy to answer any other questions you may have. Feel free, I can give you my card, email, call me. Always happy to help. This is a really critical issue, we believe. Is 788 perfect? No, it's not. But it's not dire. This is not going to cause hellfire and brimstone to fall from our skies. This is not going to result in our moral fabric falling apart. This is about helping Oklahomans. And what 788 is ultimately asking is, do you believe that Oklahomans should be able to have access to medical marijuana upon the recommendation of their physician? Do you believe that businesses in Oklahoma should be able to enter into this market and legally cultivate, process, transport, test in laboratories, and conduct research on? Do you believe that? I believe that answer is firmly yes. I think that we should really encourage our friends and neighbors to do this, not just for the business side of this, but for all the patients. And we have 400, according to the CDC, we have 400,000 Oklahomans that suffer from chronic pain. So why don't we have a restrictive list of medical conditions? Because several of these states have not allowed for chronic pain management to be a part of that. And we're finding that many, many people are effectively treated by medical marijuana for their chronic pain. That's 400,000 Oklahomans that we could help. Do we want to turn away that opportunity because we have some disagreement over whether employer rights would be harmed? On that issue, we definitely have disagreement because there's standing federal case law. There's a Supreme Court case, Dish Network, where it actually says an employer can still fire, refuse to hire, suspend, reprimand any employee if they test positive for a Schedule I narcotic, which marijuana is currently listed as. So you can do that. That's federal case law. Now, would statute actually impact and restrict that ability? That's an issue that I think us lawyers would definitely argue on. So I won't say that outright, but I will say that that's not firm. And that's also something, do we want to turn away from so many Oklahomans? Do we want to turn away from being able to address this opioid crisis? Do we want to turn away from a multi-billion-dollar business opportunity when no one else is knocking on the door in our state? I say no, and I encourage you to vote yes on 788.
Thank you again to Adria and Bud for coming. Thank you all. Y'all should be commended for being here, for being informed. As my good friend Jim Smith says, a good citizen is an informed citizen. So please go to GuthrieChamber.com to find out more of our open forums that are coming up next week. And we brought some of our magazines that talk about what's going on in Guthrie, so you can grab one on the way out. And have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bud.